And hello from Sydney. My name is Grant Case, the Director of Sales Engineering for ANZ here at Dataiku, and welcome back to the Proof of Concept podcast, the tech show where we talk about and explore real life use cases from the field and discuss some of the hot questions around this whole concept of data science and AI. And shout out to one of our friends, Matt Turk from First Mark Capital, who just came out with his new analyst report that basically he's calling it MAD. So machine learning, AI, and data index and landscape. If you haven't a chance yet, go out and read it. We'll put a link down here below. It's fantastic. He's done it the last couple of years. It's great. So, as always, with me is my co-host, Alex Hubert, up in Singapore. Hello, Alex.
Hey, guys. Nice to meet you again.
And welcome to our inaugural guest on the Proof of Concept podcast, Dr. Triveni Gandhi, one of our colleagues from Dataiku out of New York City. So welcome, Triveni, to the podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Grant and Alex. This is really exciting to be here, and to be the first guest is great.
We are
such
so
an honor.
Excited. We are so excited to have you. Honestly, I know it's going to be a great conversation because you're here.
So the reason we bring Triveni in today with us is something we talked about in our last podcast around why we should be focusing in on our machine learning models. Now we want to talk, how do we do that? Because one of the concepts, and we started to go over in the last podcast, is really this concept of explainability and understanding, ensuring fairness with our machine learning. And that's what we kind of bring Triveni on today. So Triveni, can you kind of give us a little background? This has been a real place of experience where you've been doing a lot of work.
Yeah, so I guess for my own background, I am a senior data scientist and sort of responsible AI SME here at Dataiku. And it's been really interesting to see this field develop over the past few years, especially starting with the questions that were coming out around, well, is your model interpretable, to then, is your model explainable, to, is your model even fair? And all of these different questions that have been emerging in this space as of late. It's been really, really interesting.
And I think for all of us, anytime anybody wants to talk about this, it's definitely senior leadership, C-level. It's definitely a hot topic, especially out here in APAC. So let's kind of get into it. And the first kind of beat we have here is, what is the cool stuff we can do around with this technology in terms of explainable AI? So I'll leave it to our guest, Triveni. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what's cool about this and what we can do with it?
And actually, when we were preparing it, Grant, I was talking with Triveni to try to look at it from the other way around for once, because explainable AI is such an interesting topic and can be pretty controversial if you don't do it well. That for once, I would be really interesting to hear what's not cool about stuff, that are AI related and that you cannot really explain. What are the common flaws? And I don't know, like recently you had a ton of bad publicity, obviously. Yeah, I would love to hear Triveni on that front.
Sure. Right. Yeah, I can talk about terrible examples all day. We could have a whole 20 minutes just on that, but I will limit myself. So I think the main thing is we see a lot of bias and problems with our models that once they're actually put out into the world, really have the unintended impact, or an impact that can't actually be accounted for. And that's where we see this problem with explainable AI, or lack thereof, if you will. So if we think about some like really big picture examples or famous examples, the Apple Card debacle comes to mind, where and it's only really surfaced because an engineer, a very famous engineer, posted about it on Twitter. And so then it blew up, right? But otherwise, the average person might not have been able to actually get any traction on this. Yeah, no. But what happened was that this engineer and his wife both applied for the Apple Card. They have, they share an income, but they both work. They both have a similar education. In fact, his wife earns more than him. And she was given a lower credit line or credit limit than he was. And it was pretty weird. Like, why is she getting a lower credit limit, even though everything else is very similar? And in fact, she earns more. So they
Mhm.
called Apple or they called, support, and they said, well, why is this? And the person on the line just said, I don't know. That's just what the model said. Like,
It's just the model, Triveni.
Yeah,
I don't
sorry,
know
it's
what
not
you're
it's
me.
talking
just the
about. It's
model.
just the model.
Like the computer said it, so it's true. So why are you asking me? And this was actually a big deal, right? Like if you're going to make decisions that impact real people on the ground, and you can't tell them why you made that decision, then what's the point, right? Then you're just saying like, let's just turn everything over to an algorithm and turn our brains off, and now we don't have to worry about it. That's not how this works. There's always got to be a human in the loop. So that's probably the biggest example of things being very problematic. I mean, there are numerous examples from any industry where
I
you
think
see these.
Amazon comes to mind. I think we've even talked a little bit about this podcast, the hiring, the resume algorithm. Yeah,
Yep.
that was
Yeah.
interesting. But like you said, there's so many different examples out there of this, and it's funny we talk about it like this, but it's just as if, oh my gosh, why this continues to happen? Why does it continue to happen?
And it's very likely that it's going to keep going for a while, because okay, now we start to talk about the topic, we start to be mindful of the topic, but you still don't have the full awareness and attention on the analytics part of the journey. Really, when you build a model, you still don't do it always for the good reason. You do it because you might be afraid of bad press, you might be afraid of the regulator, obviously, but you don't necessarily do it at heart with the customer in mind. And that's to me the biggest problematic things when it comes to explainable AI and how it's being treated right now in different organizations that we talk to.
Yeah. And I think that go ahead, Trivy.
I was going to say, I think that's very true. People are doing it more because there's a stick that they're afraid of versus the carrot of let's be good to our customers.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if the result is still, okay, we're doing something that's ultimately not going to harm people because we're afraid of getting in trouble, I'm okay with that. At least we're doing something about it.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair.
So.
But again, I think that becomes kind of how, and this we'll talk about a little bit later in my predictions, but I think it can be a differentiator. How are you, how do you make
definitely.
it? Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. So this is a really hot topic. And I think especially for the C-suite, and as Alex said, this is, bad press all over the map. It's just something that people don't want to get they know it's something they should be thinking about. So how do we explain it? We talk about Eli 5, my CEO. So explain it to like it's 5, my CEO, when it comes to this space right now. Triveni,
yeah. So the concept broadly of explainable versus interpretable AI is pretty interesting. So you've got explainable AI is helping us understand why a model made a prediction for a single individual or a single point in our data, versus interpretable machine learning or interpretable AI is about understanding what inputs mattered the most in building out the whole model, right? So what was important for the big picture is interpretable. What's important for a single record is explainable. And so that's sort of the overview at the five-year-old level for what is explainable AI. But why you should care about it is actually also sometimes something that has to be really clarified. And I think we've talked about bad press. We've talked about, effects on the customer, effects on the business. But it's interesting because you no longer need to explain the why as much to the C-suite. They're pretty aware. They're following the news. But now they need to know, okay, how?
Yeah, that's a very, very, very good point. And you take some very, very nasty example, like what's happening in social media, for instance. Ultimately, the how isn't exactly easy to put in place, and you still have big social media company that end up paying tons of money to third parties, organization, or just having their own teams to just monitor, manually review content, that has obviously devastating impact on the people that have to be exposed to this kind of stuff. Just because, once again, from a pure explainability perspective, there are those gray area cases where you cannot explain it properly, you cannot interpret it properly, and you still need a human in the loop. And ultimately, a human cannot catch everything.
Mhm.
And the how is still the big question mark in this equation.
I agree. And what do you think? Hit us up here. We'd love to see your comments on LinkedIn here. Also, we'd love to hear you on YouTube. Please subscribe to us. But we're very, very interested. How is explainable AI, how is interpretable AI impacting you as an organization? What do you see? And I guess that's actually a good segue into one of the things that we talk about, especially in this compare and contrast, because Triveni, I think one of the keys right now, if you even talk to the C-suite and anybody in the organization, we're having a difficult enough time how to explain, do I use R squared? Do I use AUC? What do, people are getting all of these different metrics thrown at them in terms of, should I look at accuracy or precision or recall? But it's even like, how do we go about this from the explainable side and the interpretable side? So, kind of compare and contrast, how do we differentiate kind of that machine learning and how well the machine learning model is doing versus how well is it doing from an explainable and an interpretable perspective?
Yeah, I think that's fair. The good thing about explainable and interpretable is that a number of the methods that you would use for that are actually applied after the model is built.
Mhm.
So you don't need to worry about after I've selected, when I select my model, am I selecting it for the most explainable or most interpretable? In fact, it's sort of a post hoc analysis that you're doing. And not every model can be interpreted, right? At the end of the day, if you're running something through a neural network, you're not going to make sense of these feature vectors and these layers. You're not going to be able to interpret that. That's the whole point of a neural network.
So that Chinese NLP model that had 101 billion parameter inputs, we can't figure that one out.
We can't interpret it, right? Remember, keep in mind the difference between explainable and interpretable. We can't interpret it at a large level, but we can use techniques like Shapley and ICE to say, okay, how do I explain an individual record that this model is predicting? And that's then where you can get a lot of room to explore and experiment and say, okay, when I run this through an explainability model or I explain this record, it's showing me that this person's age is the most important factor in their decision. Is that something that we're okay with, or is that discriminatory, or is it that this is truly something that age is known to be the most important factor here? So things like that can help.
Okay. So it's kind of that inductive versus deductive reasoning in terms of how do we understand that? Okay.
Yeah.
So Alex, from an APAC perspective, how do we go about explaining this? Because again, I think we have a number of different cultures here in Asia and how they interact with these sorts of techniques. Just in general, we have low context versus high context societies here. What's your kind of perspective on this?
It's a topic that's picking up in the APAC region. It's definitely probably, I think, lagging in terms of awareness. If you strictly compare it to the amount of attention that you have, for instance, in US or in Europe, it's picking up countries by countries. For instance, I have a lot of this conversation around explainable AI in India. Interestingly enough, you have a lot of push on the regulation that makes it top of the agenda when they look after something that is data science, AI related. Can I have something that's going to help me be better at producing explanation and interpretability? Because otherwise, right now, let's be clear, the compare and contrast is, otherwise I'm going to have a validation team that is going to review manually all of those different criteria, all of those different predictions, and try to make sure that we don't do anything controversial or that could get us in trouble with the regulator or even the customer. So that's what's at stake right now. So yeah, India, definitely there is a push. Singapore, there's obviously a push. I would say the countries that are more um, advanced, if I may say, or closer to what you would say to what you would see in the US and in Europe are on there. And then for the other countries, it's slowly catching up, and it's the kind of conversation we also introduce. And we're pleased to see the type of answers and response that we get from our customers. To me, that's the most important. It's not just a topic that just up there in the air and people are like, oh yeah, we're just going to care about that later. They're really happy to get advice as to how to look at the problem, what sort of solution they should design, making sure that they stay on top of what's happening worldwide.
Yeah.
And you make a good point, Alex, about sort of maturity, because even in the US and in Europe, it's not like every single company is saying, oh, we need to be doing this. It's really about where you are in your AI maturity
Yeah,
scale,
exactly.
right? This is not something that off the bat, if you're like, okay, I need to just do a proof of concept
Right.
on data science. If you're trying to do a proof of concept of how AI works in your company or how AI could work for your company, this is not going to be top of mind. And, I think that's okay. But
Yeah,
as you
exactly.
start scaling, you're going to realize, okay, there's regulations, there's things that we're doing. How do we do this? And so that sort of maturity index is also important.
And it's often something we say here on the POC anyway. I remember we were saying the exact same stuff for, I think, Feature Store or this kind of stuff. If you're not at the stage where you are producing and churning thousands of predictions every day that can have a direct impact on the life of your customer, I'm not saying you shouldn't consider the topic, but I would also understand if it's not top of mind yet.
Right.
I think it's just what's the risk and what's the impact, right? Yeah. So I think, kind of transitioning, and we'd love to hear what you're thinking. What do you think? What are you looking for? What are the sort of tools you think you need to help you with explainable AI? Please hit us up with a comment. We'd love to hear from you as it relates to this. So, we typically talk about this. How can we save money, make money, or improve the customer experience? I think we all understand we want to avoid the regulator, right? So what can companies do to help differentiate themselves? Can they differentiate themselves with the use of explainable AI? I mean, Triveni, what's your thoughts on this?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, you can. And I think that even being able to show internally, this is how we built our model. These are how certain records are being explained. These are how we checked that things are, above board or fitting for a regulator. That in itself, being able to make that more open and available to anyone who's going to be interacting with that model from like a business perspective, that's really powerful, right? That's already a differentiator. Because often when you start showing these like inner workings, so to speak, to people who are business users or domain experts, but maybe not machine learning experts, they can point out and say, that's weird. That shouldn't be the case because I know it to be a fact that XYZ. So that already gives you an edge up, right? But then the companies that are even going out of their way and saying, hey, person, we predicted that you're going to like this dress. And here's why. That is next
the old
level.
Amazon, you looked at this, so you might like this.
But even then, Amazon saying you looked at that. They're not really telling you why.
They don't go further enough. Like I think as a customer and as someone who's, all of us who experience AI in our day-to-day now, whether you go on Netflix or stuff like that, the thing that's always very frustrating purely from a customer perspective is that you can feel that an algorithm is feeding you with things, but you also can guess why he's taking that decision, yet that decision is completely wrong. And you have no way to sort of have the algorithm simply telling you like, oh yeah, like I'm predicting this because of these reasons. And if you start to have a better interaction between a user and the machine by just opening up the machine and saying, hey, this is how we end up making those predictions, you also open the door to the feedback loop. And all of a sudden, as a user, I can now feedback the Netflix algorithm or whichever algorithm. And all of a sudden, you capture more data points that will probably help you make better prediction overall. I think it's a massive mistake to just keep it as if, or try to build a model that is going to comprehend everyone and be the perfect model, and not opening it up, because you know that if you open it up and you start to show, then people are going to see the flaws. Probably they're going to make fun of it. They're going to troll it and stuff. I think it's a massive mistake. The more you open up those predictions to the customer, and you allow the customer to feedback in regard to the prediction, the more you strengthen your relationship with the customer, and also you're going to have better prediction on the long run because you have better data.
Yeah. And that takes us to our final segment, and that is predictions, where all of your predictions are going to be correct, or your money back for you paid in this podcast. So Triveni, put on your prognosticator's cap, and what do you see in the future for our explainable and interpretable AI?
Sure, I'm just running a neural network up here. Right? What do I see in the future? Wow, a lot. I mean, so one, there are a number of sort of frameworks and tools that are being produced constantly by folks. People who are researchers, people who are in like the AI regulation space, all of this, that are creating toolkits to help companies actually start using these principles in their day-to-day. So with the number of toolkits coming forward, my main prediction is that everybody's going to be doing this pretty soon. And if you're not, you're left behind. So that's one. And then I think the other thing is that as Alex pointed out, we are going to start seeing more of this sort of feedback loop or opportunities to contest a model, especially when it comes to things that are really like critical for someone's livelihood. Okay, we're denying you a loan because XYZ. Well, I can test that. Or you can't have this medicine because we think you're going to abuse it. Well, okay, why do you think that? And whatever it might be. So those are the two main things I think I see coming. I think people are starting to wise up, and companies that stay ahead of it are the ones who are going to be successful.
Alex.
No, I completely agree with Triveni. Like, if you really want to make the most out of explainable AI, you have to understand that you owe it to your customers, and it's a massive opportunity to once again strengthen your relationship with your customer. There's a big topic right now around AI UX, and the way you obviously going to design your UX is going to open the door to that feedback loop mechanism, explainability, and overall just building more trust in the systems that are around us every day, and we're just going to see more of that, because and the thing that I'm absolutely convinced, and that is kind of like liberating, if you don't do it, it's fine. Innovation is going to do it, and you're going to be disrupted. So it's okay.
And then for my prediction, as someone who came out of the financial services space, I think there's a gold mine awaiting the companies that figure this out to actually turn it into a profit center. I'm old enough to remember FICO scores. Nobody knew FICO. You couldn't get your FICO score, and nobody knew what was going into it. Guess what? Now you can basically, here's your FICO score. Here's how it was calculated. Here's how you can manage it and change it. And guess what? There's a lot of industry that's made a lot of money doing that. So when it comes to the models, it's not just good. It's not just good from just an explainable perspective, an AI perspective. It can be also good business as well. So with that, we would love to hear your predictions. What are you thinking? So please subscribe to us. Hit us up with comments here on the Proof of Concept podcast. I want to thank our very first guest, Dr. Triveni Gandhi, for coming on. It's like, haven't seen you in so ever. So hopefully I'll get back to the US at some point soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me both. This was exciting and fun. And the Alex and Grant show is pretty good. I like it.
And so for myself, Grant Case, and Alex Hubert up in Singapore, we want to thank you for joining us here on the Proof of Concept podcast. Guys. Take care. Thanks.
See you.
and have a great day.